You will never succeed. Are you sure you've thought this through? That will be way too hard for you. Where will you ever come up with that kind of money? Hi gang, it's Shirley here on another episode of Staying Mentally Fit TV, the place to be to keep your mental health in shape. And today is Q&A Wednesday. Today's question comes from Heather, and she writes the following. Hi Shirley, I'm a 29-year-old female living a couple hundred miles from my parents. Despite being an adult, I still turn to my parents for support and advice. While they've given me many great pointers along the way, sometimes they respond with negative and unsupportive comments and worst-case scenarios when I fill them in on my life. They say things like, "You couldn't do that. You'd never be able to make it. It would be too hard. You wouldn't last at that job. Where would you even begin? How could you afford it?" etc., etc., etc. Although I know that my parents' comments are well-intentioned, and while some of their concerns are valid, I still can't help but feel slightly offended, overwhelmed, and a bit anxious. To be honest, it's hard not to take their comments personally, no matter how open-minded I try to be. Could you give me some tips on what I can do to take criticism a bit better without getting all defensive about it? Thank you so much for your question, Heather. Sometimes our parents may be a little bit unsupportive of our dreams, or they don't really understand what our needs are. They may only be able to give us support in some ways, but not in others. And no one likes to be criticized, especially if the criticism comes from the people who we love most. But the matter of the fact is that criticism is unavoidable. So unless you decide to live in a cave and vow never to talk to anyone ever again, then you'll likely benefit from learning to cope with those icky feelings that comes with being criticized. So Heather, here are my suggestions on what you can do so that you don't take your parents' comments in a personal or defensive way. Tip number 1, relax. Criticism can get you feeling all tensed up. Your body can become more defensive and aggressive, your tone of voice become more threatening, and your mind stops working properly. And that's why you find difficulty responding rationally. Now, if this is the case, remember to take some deep breaths, unclench your fists, and release the tension from your face and your body. Tip number 2, agree in part. You don't need to agree with the entire criticism. You may decide to agree with some of it, but not other parts of it. Tip number 3, listen and wait. Resist the urge to respond right away. Let the person criticizing you voice their opinions completely. Now, if you jump in too quickly, the person's going to feel challenged and speak back to you with increased intensity and emotional tone. Listening means just that. It doesn't mean you have to accept it or buy into what they have to say. Tip number 4, don't try to change their minds. No matter how much you wish this to be the case, we cannot control what other people are thinking. People, just like your parents, have the right to voice their opinions even if they're mistaken. So don't think that you need to keep justifying, explaining, and arguing endlessly until they agree with you. They may never agree with you, and you don't need them to. Tip number 5, thank the critique. Now, even if your parents who is criticizing you wasn't particularly nice about it, or you have no intention to act in accordance to the advice, thanking your parents reminds us that simple feedback doesn't hurt us. And that's all for today, folks. Has this video gotten you started thinking about how you deal with negative criticism? If you're also feeling stuck in this area, why don't you shoot me an email and tell me all about it? I can help guide you through the process of understanding what's happening and offer you some new ways of interacting with your parents so that their negative feedback don't consistently upset and aggravate you. Now, if you love this video, then I'm sure your family and friends will love it as well. So please share the love. See you again next week, same time, same place on SMF TV.